So I believe I have now started the recording. So really thank you for bearing with me while I did that. And I should have said, we've got a storm here today. Everyone knows we've got a storm here today. So if we do have any problems with power or connectivity during the session, we will record the session and send that back out to everyone so people don't miss it. So without further ado, let's just talk a little bit more about the work that we've been doing here in the Hampshire and Isle of Wight system. And I'd like to start by really setting the context. And I think we all recognise that we are living and working in really challenging times. There isn't a week goes by when we don't hear in the local, regional or national media where they're not talking about the pressure of NHS experiencing what they describe as the greatest pressure in our 75-year history, whether that's operational pressures in emergency departments or urgent treatment centres, within primary or social care, our winter planning, our balancing of budgets. We're all dealing with a time of significant pressure where we're trying to sustain the recruitment and retention of our amazing people. And this challenging working environment is also set in the context of a national housing crisis. We have rising cost of living, driving property prices, in some ways a bit of a perfect storm, which means that staff can't always find affordable housing in close proximity to work. We see that staff are downsizing as much as possible for their family size. They live in cheaper market areas, which means that often people are commuting by car or public transport on top of long shifts. But in the Isle of Wight system, that sort of lack of affordable housing, both in terms of cost and availability, was identified as a significant challenge about 2 or 3 years ago, which was impacting the recruitment and retention of our workforce. In collaboration with the Cabinet Office, who are represented here today, and One Public Estate colleagues, the ICB's People Board commissioned research to evidence the link between housing and workforce stability. Working alongside Savills over the last couple of years, we have triangulated data from 45,000 anonymous staff contract records. We've developed a housing needs survey, which was responded to by nearly 5,000 staff. We've overlaid this with housing market analysis, both of rented and mortgaged property markets across 6 market areas. And that rigour in our research has enabled us to calculate confidence levels of 95% of statistical significance, which means that we can extrapolate findings to the wider population across the NHS. Our research was conducted in September before the mini budget and the subsequent cost of living crisis. So some of the data that I'm going to talk about today needs to be couched in the context that things have changed. Our research found that too many staff cannot afford to live in a suitable home, and this is having an adverse impact on recruitment and retention. We found that over 2,000 staff were financially stretched in meeting their housing costs, with a significant proportion spending more than 33% of their household income on monthly rent. Just under half of that group were in housing need, which means that they cannot sustain the price for a home for their household type. Some staff groups and demographics were affected more than others, with some equality and some equity issues evident. And several hundred staff were found to be living in insecure or temporary accommodation, sofa surfing, staying with friends and family, which would meet the statutory definition for homelessness. And finally, over 40% of staff were thinking of relocating to live and work outside of the Hampshire Isle of Wight footprint, and cited their housing as a factor in that decision. And interestingly, for those of you, and we'll share a copy of the link afterwards, who might have seen a copy of the NHS Homes Alliance white paper, that figure rises to 68% in more recent research. So, you know, really quite stark figures. And we believe that finding an answer to the challenge of that affordable housing solution is not only critical to workforce stability, but also a key enabler of quality in services, but also the resilience of healthcare provision in local communities. So today we'd like to share with you a little bit about the work that we've been doing here in developing a unique housing offer as part of an employee offer to support internationally recruited colleagues to find settled housing in communities. We'd like to invite you to explore whether housing solutions, whether capital or revenue based, are either a workforce initiative or are they part of a broader plan around a pathway to safeguard the resilience of local services themselves. I would really like to come back to that question later on in today's session. So I'd like to hand you over then to my colleagues Patrick Fowler and Kirsten Mordaunt to talk about the NHS Housing Hub. Thank you, Kirsten, Pat.
Thanks, Sharon. So I'm really pleased to be joined by Kirsten today. So what I'll do is I'll give an overview of the Housing Hub and then hand over to Kirsten to talk about one of the specific projects within that. So thanks, Sharon. So I'm Pat. So I work with Sharon and the Hampshire and Wight Integrated Care Board on a housing programme to tackle health inequalities, but also with today's focus supporting the workforce recruitment and retention plans through housing solutions for staff. Really fortunate to work with a great team, many of them on the call today, and really pleased that we've been shortlisted for an HSJ award, where the award ceremony is in a couple of weeks, so fingers crossed for that. In terms of taking you kind of through this segment, really wanted to first of all wanted you to hear from staff themselves about the impact of the support provided to them. So Sharon, next slide, please. Just waiting for the voices.
Yeah, Pat, I'm so sorry. I've got an error message come up on the audio file, having played it beautifully 2 seconds ago. So I'm really sorry. If we could perhaps hear from voices in the next slide.
Absolutely. Yep. So next slide. So what you would have heard was 3 colleagues that have benefited and really happy with what the outcomes were around the support they provided. And again, I'll talk more about the support in a moment. But first of all, before we speak about the specifics of the Housing Hub, we wanted to share a little bit more about its origins and by way of understanding some of the challenges that staff faced, and got some examples on the screen at the moment. So the service very much rooted in the words of staff themselves. So colleagues shared that they were being overlooked for accommodation and sometimes felt discriminated and experienced discrimination. Difficult house sharing situations and dynamics. So staff, after a really busy and difficult shift, going home to somewhere that wasn't relaxing for them and caused other pressures on them. So it wasn't a place to kind of recoup ahead of the next shift. Other colleagues talking about numerous viewings and knockbacks from going to those viewings, really affecting their self-worth, their well-being, and sometimes in some cases their performance. And then the unaffordable issue about there being property that was out of reach of people, particularly around their household type, and particularly around wanting to be together as a family. Next slide, please, Sharon. So in terms of what we wanted to cover today, we wanted to talk briefly about the journey we've been on to establish the service, the delivery model itself, impact to date, some reflections about our learning, and then share some ideas and plans with you for future service development. Next slide, please, Sharon. So our journey to date, Sharon shared some of that around some of the research that we've been undertaking, but it's as I said, it started very much in staff feedback and our knowledge of the housing market, knowing it was impacting recruitment, retention and wellbeing of staff. The experience shows housing is a key determinant, and lots of people would have heard of it being a key determinant of health. we think it's not only of health but also of healthy services, impacting upstream service resilience. So through engagement with a range of partners within the NHS and outside of the NHS, the Housing Hub was born, with a particular focus on our international recruited colleagues to help them settle on arrival and settle and put down roots in the community, while at the same time providing really important intelligence to inform the strategic case, the bigger picture case, to seek and supply new housing opportunities. Next slide, please, Sharon. So in terms of the Housing Hub, day-to-day delivery, we have 5 whole-time equivalent team members who meet regularly. They have a whole range of different ways they catch up, obviously in person, but also more informally. And the WhatsApp group, I understand, is a very important part of the hive activity there within the team. Really important that they're sharing their experiences and they're sharing ideas and problem solving together through the process. It's a patch-based focus, and it's very much around developing and building place-based networks and solutions within their different areas. And it's very much a holistic approach to staff members needing housing support. So it's not just a case of saying someone needs a property, it's where that property is, the affordability of it, the type of property, closeness to community links and other amenities, and obviously distance to travel to and from work as well. So it's really ensuring staff we're working with make informed choices about their next step. We've also developed governance measures around data collection, reporting and monitoring, providing oversight, and also linking in with our local authority colleagues, because we know that they are under considerable pressure around housing and housing demand within each locality that we work in, and we want to help that as much as we can without putting more pressure on colleagues there. Next slide, please, Sharon. So the support staff is through a pooling of budgets really across the different trusts working within our patch, and I've got different trusts up on the screen around our map at the moment. And housing support is offered to our internationally recruited colleagues, especially where they're preparing to leave trust accommodation. So many colleagues will arrive in the UK and go through an accreditation process in terms of their qualifications. And at that point, many of them are being supported and housed by their trust at that time. But it's after that the Housing Hub really comes into play, really, into helping people move out of that and into independent, generally private accommodation. So there's a focus on international recruits because of the way the funding is, but we will respond to other staff in crisis where there's a real housing need, and a housing solution is really important for them. Next slide, please, Sharon. So in terms of the structure to deliver the service, we have our key team members on the front line providing the support. There's day-to-day management. We've got our link to our colleagues at Citizens Advice, who provide amazing regulated advice to the staff we're working with. Support and guidance through Sharon and myself, and then further reporting through into the Integrated Care Board, our programme lead, and into our Senior Responsible Officer and our steering group as well, giving that oversight and coverage and guidance. Next slide, please, Sharon. So with reference to service delivery, there's 2 main strands. We've got the housing support, which I've mentioned, and that's very much looking at individual staff needs to do with themselves, individuals, but also whether there's family or other friends that they want to and to live with. The whole process of all the many hoops of trying to find accommodation, from having the right ID, looking at references from employers, the whole viewings process, all the way through to sign up and getting those important keys in their hand. But as I mentioned, there's very much that community focus as well, about what community needs do they have and where is the right location for our colleagues. We've also got our NHS rooms, which I'm really pleased Kirsten's going to talk about very shortly. And then on the right hand side, we've got our regulated advice that I mentioned through Citizens Advice. So that's really important in terms of helping around debt, around tenancy matters that are going into obviously more the legal side of tenancy issues. Maybe issues around wrongful evictions and advice around that as well, discrimination and other legal matters. So really, really important part of our service. Next slide, please, Sharon. So what's been achieved? So since August last year, that was when the service really got going and set up. We've had over 800 approaches from colleagues for assistance, averaging around 50 each month. And it's the team have been amazing in terms of attaining and securing around 400 tenancies over that time. And that's a mix of directly supporting someone to go through the process and get those keys in their hand and move in, to also signposting as well, where people feel more confident of navigating the process themselves. Obviously, there's NHS rooms that we've set up, but the real important part here in terms of cost avoidance and what that brings. So it's not only outcomes for our individual colleagues in terms of them settling, but there's also the cost avoidance around additional recruitment and retention, because someone's settling in the area, housing costs or trying to find the right home for them. If that's not possible, they may look elsewhere. They may move to another part of the country. So then we lose that person, and obviously we lose their skills and their time in supporting the NHS services. So we estimate currently that's around £250,000 in terms of cost avoidance. Great citizens advice outcomes around housing, around benefits, and around immigration as well. And really important to link in terms of our development more widely with bringing the intelligence through our conversations with other key players in this. So our landlord colleagues, letting agents, and obviously us working with our steering group and ICB colleagues. Next slide, please. So I'm really pleased now I'll hand over to Kirsten, one of our Housing Hub team, talk more about the NHS Rooms initiative. Thanks, Kirsten.
Thank you. So NHS Rooms, I can hear myself. Is everyone muted now? Yes, that's better. So NHS Rooms is a new free offer as part of the Housing Hub. It was started at the beginning of this year, and it is basically a platform to match colleagues, NHS colleagues who may have a spare room to rent out with those in need of short-term or long-term accommodation. The offer is open to all NHS staff across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight from all trusts and the ICB. So we're even now looking to see if we can have staff from surrounding trusts who may work in surrounding trusts but are living in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, how we can reach those, because I know some people live in Hampshire and work for Surrey, for example. So there's even a greater pool of people that we can reach. It is not, however, an offer, it's not a letting agent, so we're not managing the relationship between the host and the renter. It is mainly an introductory matching service to match people up. So next slide, please. So how does it work? I hope you can understand my fancy graphic here. So the host interested in signing up for the service would fill in a Google form, a registration form, in which we ask some very basic questions around size of rooms, where is the room located, contact details, would they be happy with individuals or would they be happy with a couple, indicative renting price. We're also asking type of tenancy they'd be looking for. Is it under 3 months, more than 3 months, even longer, 6 months? So we have a basic understanding of what they're looking for. We then go back to them, welcome them to the scheme, but the first important next step, really, before they can become live hosts, is to guide them through the advice process. So we encourage them to get independent advice wherever possible. We do now with Citizens Advice have the offer to refer them, or the opportunity to refer them to Citizens Advice so that they can get their questions answered there. But of course, they're free to find other independent advice to make sure their rental agreements don't prohibit them from, so for example, if they're in a housing association, from subletting, their mortgage agreements don't prohibit them from subletting. There aren't any issues with their home insurance. So we want to make sure that their own status, residential and housing status, is not being impacted by subletting. Once they're happy, they know what they're letting themselves in for and they're happy to proceed. We put them on our database as live and we share their details with our Housing Hub clients. So if a client is then interested in saying, yes, I'm interested in looking at that room, we pass on their details as well to the host. So that's the introductory service, and it's then down to the client and the host to meet for a viewing, to arrange a viewing, to discuss the rental price, the rental arrangements, the contracts, and everything else. We are there to guide. So if any of those two parties have further questions, need further support, we can do that. But we do not necessarily manage that relationship between the two. But it usually works quite well. So I'll get to the stats later, but it usually works like that, works quite well like that. So next slide, Pat. So as a minimum requirement, a host must have an NHS email address. So that's either nhs.net or the trust email address. That's our way of safeguarding, or our only way of making sure people are actually an NHS employee. The room must be larger than 6.5 square meters and for sole use, and hosts must provide a bed, mattress, wardrobe, and as well as access to bathroom facilities and food preparation, storage, and cooking. Next slide. So some questions sometimes around why we've gone with this model rather than any other external offers that are out there. For us, it made sense to have a local solution. Firstly, because it's a local offer to local colleagues. So the fact that we can say you work for NHS in Hampshire and Wight, and we help you rent out to a local colleague. That works quite well with hosts. We can offer the service for free, which is equally important. We have a lot of flexibility around the host's needs. So some hosts come to us and say, I'm not quite sure about this. I want to start off with a short-term let. I may extend later. We've had cases where people actually said, I only want a few weeks, and months down the line, they're still renting from them because they got on so well. We have the flexibility to work with hosts and with the clients without having them to commit very early on a fixed term. And most importantly, we have direct access, then it directly increases the pool of accommodation available to the Housing Hub officers to offer out to clients. So we don't have to go to another external agent. We can make those rooms available to the clients straight away. Next slide. So this is when I said, it's going really well for us. We've had 50 initial registrations since the scheme started in January. Initial registrations, that's people filling in the registration form. Not all of them went through with it after finding out more about it. Some of them found out actually it's not the right thing for them. It's not really what they thought it was, or they understood that actually there was more involved in it than they anticipated. But out of those 50, 21 hosts went live and completed the registration process. And out of those 21 hosts, 11 lets have been agreed. Most of them for no fixed term. There are also some short-term lets within it. And we currently have 10 rooms vacant and available to be rent out. I've been trying to look into why these haven't gone yet, but quite often it's down to location. May not be ideal for some of the clients that are looking for a room, or some of the clients who may have a phase where they're already in that phase where they want to get their family over and they're looking for long-term, bigger accommodation rather than just a room. The way we're kind of taking this off forward now is, so we're looking to further increase the host base. So ideally, we would want a steady flow of new registration each month in order to be able to sustain the offer. But equally, we'd like to explore how we can extend the, because we've got 10 rooms at the moment that are kind of vacant, and they may not be suitable for our international recruits, but they may be suitable for others that may be looking for short-term accommodation. So looking into student placements, for example, which may then also help trusts to increase their student base in their workforce.
Great, thanks, Kirsten. Thanks for that. So a really important development as the service has evolved, and that's very much a kind of a key principle of the service. It's trying to be as responsive as it can be to the changing needs, and we seek to work with trust to try and predict new arrivals into our local community, so we can kind of structure the team around that as well. But obviously looking at ways to develop the service, and NHS Rooms is one of those. So in terms of kind of learning and top tips, very much whole person focus is really, really important, because we totally believe that a house is more than just bricks and mortar. It's actually a home, and it's really important for staff to be able to have that safe, secure, comfortable place that's right for them and their household, to then be able to work really, really well. And in terms of our recruitment, training, retention and wellbeing as well. The team being multi-skilled, we've got a range of skills and experience within the team, which the hub overall really benefits from different experiences around lettings, around benefits, around support work, around needs and support, and working right across the patch, but also within the NHS and outside of the NHS as well. So it's a great spread of mix as well. And those local relationships are key. So relationships with the trusts in terms of workforce leads and colleagues, but also those relationships with our with private landlords and local letting agents as well, where organisations and agents will come to us saying they've got a property available, rather than us having to try and go and search for that as well. Workforce strategy is really, really important, and trying to demonstrate the impact and the outcomes, and the investment in this work is really, really important, and the benefits, and Summer and Martin will be able to share some of that as well as we go through. The equity for our internationally recruited colleagues as well is really, really important, but also thinking about our non-internationally recruited colleagues in going forward, because we know from the research that there's a significant issue around housing costs and housing affordability for all staff right across the patch. And our RCS, so the integrated care system partners, really important. And I'll go back to that reference to the pressure on our local authority colleagues and our housing colleagues. We really need to look at this in the longer term. We need to bring in further supply, more supply of housing, and not rely on the small supply there is currently available, because it only displaces and puts pressure on others. So we really need to look in the long term as a group to collaborate much more on that. Next slide, please, Sharon. So what's next for us? Well, there's definitely lots more that we want to keep doing, but as always, there's lots of further opportunities to evolve and adapt the service to support recruitment and retention. We're focusing more on impact, how to link and embed this more into workforce planning, and also seeking more feedback from staff themselves in terms of then helping inform how we take the service forward. Also at the bottom there, we're really keen to win that award, so hopefully that will be one of our next steps in the coming weeks, that we'll be able to confirm that we've won that award. There's more engagement plan with trust colleagues as well, with the housing market, to hone our process and maximise our impact, and that increasing the reach of NHS Rooms, which Kirsten's already alluded to. So next slide, please, Sharon. This is my last slide, I believe. It is, yeah. So it's my last slide. So thank you for listening to us. The NHS is facing significant workforce pressures with current and future plans in place. But housing offers a great solution as part of that to support recruitment, retention and the well-being of our teams. Housing is more than a determinant of health, it's also a determinant of healthy services. And we've embarked on a journey as a group, as a group of partners, to do more but we're already seeing the benefits. I'm really pleased now pass back to Sharon, who will continue with our session. Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you so much, Pat, Kirsten. Really, really great presentation. Thank you both. Virtual round of applause in the room from me. Thank you so much. And really good to hear about the impact and the opportunity to use housing as a solution rather than seeing housing necessarily as a problem in the recruitment and retention of staff. So without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to my colleagues Summer Lovegrove and Martin Jones, who are going to talk a little bit more from an NHS trust perspective on the impact of home from HR and employee support measures. So hello, Summer, lovely to see you. I think you're going to be speaking first.
Yes, thank you, Sharon. And I think just to follow on the earlier presentation, the island is very unique in its approach, and this presentation will talk through some of the challenges that we have and align to what Kirsten was talking in terms of the proactive steps that we're taking now with the housing hub to support our arrivals. But for those that don't know the island, the key pressure for the island community is housing supply, and predominantly it's driven by a number of factors. So the Isle of Wight is only 23 miles long, and from the most easterly point near Bembridge to the most famous point where the Needles, the Stacks and the Lighthouse sits, to the western tip. So internationally renowned for sailing, town of Cowes, northern point of the diamond shape of the island, and most southerly point is marked by another lighthouse, which is 13 miles away at St Catherine's. So it's a familiar name for anyone who regularly listens to the BBC Shipping's forecast. As I say, the total area of the island is approximately about 147 square miles. So again, not very big. It's probably smaller than some counties across the UK. And almost half has been designated to an area of outstanding natural beauty, which then reduces our pool even smaller. So with the 57 miles of coastline to explore, you're never really more than a few miles away from the sea, wherever you are on the island, which is lovely. And each coast is very different in terms of character and ranges from river to estuaries to soaring cliffs, with some secluded coves, which is perfect for rock pooling, and beautiful beaches for swimming and sunbathing in the summer months. It's quite a clear, stark difference from what we've got now, unfortunately. But some of the key challenges that we'll talk through is the high demand. So the Isle of Wight is a hugely popular tourist destination, and it also attracts retirees and people seeking for a more rural or coastal lifestyle. And this high demand for housing, both permanent residents and holiday homes, has driven up property prices significantly and making it more difficult for local residents to afford housing. The limited housing supply that we have also has a number of physical constraints on the island, which means that there's limited land available for housing development and new opportunities. Additionally, the Isle of Wight has a significant amount of protected natural and historical areas, which again limits where new houses can be built, and the scarcity of available land makes it even more challenging to increase the housing supply to meet the demand. We also have the added pressure of seasonal employment. So the Isle of Wight's economy is heavily reliant on our tourism, and many of the jobs that we have here are seasonal in its nature. Obviously with Cowes Week and the Isle of Wight Festival, and during the summer months, and we've got all of the regattas that are here, it can make it incredibly challenging for residents to secure stable year-round employment and housing. So the seasonal fluctuations in demand for housing can also affect its affordability on the island. We also have income disparities. So the island has a mixed economy, and while some parts of the island are really prosperous, there are other areas which have a lower average income and higher levels of depredation across the island. This can lead to disparities in housing affordability, with some residents really struggling to find suitable and affordable accommodation. The lack of affordable housing is one of the biggest challenges that myself as head of resourcing, but also with Becky at the Housing Hub, really struggles to support. So So there is a shortage of affordable housing on the Isle of Wight. Local authorities and housing associations often face challenges in providing adequate supply of social and affordable housing to meet the needs of our local population. Second homes and short-term rentals take up a significant part of the market as well, and the presence of second home and the properties used for short-term rentals, such as through Airbnb, can reduce the housing stock market further for long-term residents. Many property owners may prioritise income over tourism, over housing for long-term permanent residents. And we saw a big shift during the pandemic, which prompted a surge in demand for rural and coastal properties as people sought more space, green surroundings, and all in all, a change of lifestyle. This then in turn was driving up the property prices and making it more difficult for local residents to be able to afford housing. Some property owners and landlords shifted their focus away from the tourism, selling properties outright as they could make the impact of COVID and the cost of living crisis. We also have, being an island, limited road and rail networks, which can make it very difficult for staff to secure accessible housing across the island footprint, driving demand in those areas which are well serviced by public transport even harder, particularly in the areas around the hospital and commuting to and from the hospital. Next slide, please. So the background for the trust itself on site, we do have, we work quite closely with Sovereign Housing, and they support our short-term key worker accommodation on site. The accommodation is literally a stone's throw from the hospital and is well serviced and comes directly to staff who are looking to have short-term occupancy. There is a huge demand for our on-site accommodation, and the Trust is exploring new ways of how we can develop that offering, but also how we can manage it more effectively and efficiently and improve the capacity within the short-term market that we have. We are also looking at flexible accommodation, so we have options for host families, which we use to support for our international arrivals. And again, working very closely with Becky at the Housing Hub, trying to, I mean, she is just remarkable. She's a true advocate for the work that she does. And I'll touch upon some of the volumes of work that she's done so far. And to be fair, it's been invaluable having someone as part of our organisation that can provide that housing support and knowledge across from the island to our incoming international arrivals. Next slide, please. So the volume of staff looking for properties, as I mentioned, is incredibly high. We have roughly about 145 international arrivals so far. That includes AHPs, nurses, medics, and then the family members that come to join them along that journey. And so far, we've secured 19 tenancies from that 145. 38 have then self-served after having that initial conversation with the Housing Hub and the support from the Trust international recruitment team, and they've been able to secure and find their own tenancies, still leaving us with 68 in our pipeline looking for long-term accommodation. And we do support them, as I say, with short-term options, and we look at negotiating that as their challenge increases. But the biggest challenge we have is obviously the ones that arrive during the summer months and then moving them on when the next cohorts arrive. Host families has been a very positive solution that the Trust has implemented over recent years, and very similar to what Kirsten was outlining, but essentially we look for local families on the island that can support international arrivals, and we support them with a 12-week programme, and that costs £450 for the first 3 months. The Trust will cover that income for the host. We are looking at ways of how we can have a bit more structure to that programme, and obviously look at checks and assurance that we can offer both the host and also the employee, just to make sure that it's a lot more rigorous in terms of that approach, and then also outlining where the accountability sits between both parties. And as I say, the current position, we've got on-site accommodation with Sovereign Housing, but we also support and are looking at a new policy to support those who don't necessarily want to relocate to the island, but also then have some funding support to do the commuting costs, which can be incredibly expensive if you're looking at it on a regular basis. Next slide, please. As I outlined from the beginning, some of the challenges that we have is affordability. The average cost that we have at the moment for a host family is £450, which is £15 a night. You can't find anywhere on the island at that rate. And a direct rent at the moment for £600 would be for 7 nights, which is just astronomical in the current market. We were looking at providing support to people that arrived, to our cohorts that arrived in September, because we had no on-site accommodation, and we were being quoted almost £1,400 for 7 nights. And that isn't sustainable for individuals or the trust when we have high volumes of international arrivals coming. And then we're looking at options to try and support the upfront rental costs associated with that, which is making it incredibly difficult for those who are in the short-term accommodation to move on to find affordable housing, but then creating a backlog of people that have arrived and then don't again have the opportunity to move on. The affordability of properties is incredibly tough for our arrivals, and even looking at those who come in at a band 5, band 6 level, they don't meet the minimum affordability criteria. And we're working quite closely with Becky to develop our relationships with housing providers to see if we can offer some assurance and letters of support from the trust for these individuals to secure accommodation. But market intelligence is telling us that many holiday homes are still permanently occupied following COVID. So the housing market is getting squeezed from every direction at the moment. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, in terms of host families, we do have a number of challenges in that area. We have 166 hosts registered on our system. Of that, we have 50 nurses staying within those hosts. And many of those nurses have been with a host for over 12 months. We have 41 hosts presently not available or able to support with incoming arrivals, which then leaves us with 22 available. And when we have cohorts of, we've had recently larger cohorts arriving of 35, we really struggle to find ways of integrating them into the community through the host families, and then also struggling to find placements with sovereign housing. It is getting significantly better, and I think it is because of the proactive conversations that we're having as a trust, but also with the Housing Hub to negotiate those conversations and to have a proactive focus on accommodation and its increasing challenges across the island. And one of the conversations that we've had recently is the feedback we're having from our international colleagues is the discrimination that they're feeling and seeing when they go to view properties. And we have adopted a zero tolerance approach. So when we get the feedback, we speak directly to the estate agents or landlords and the individuals to support them in what they're feeling and what they've experienced. And Becky from the Housing Hub has gone to viewings with individuals. She's arranged virtual viewings. She's supporting in having the communication with the landlords and estate agents to just try and offer that bit more support. And with support from the recruitment team as well, we're trying to reduce as much as we possibly can in terms of challenge for them. But again, it's a very demand-centric process at the moment. So Becky is inundated with individuals looking for help. And we have noticed a huge number of scams through social media channels, particularly through Facebook and Marketplace, of people marketing rooms that aren't available or asking for cash up front. So we're now having to adapt our communications and running regular sessions with international arrivals to make sure that they're aware of the scams and what to do and how to escalate. And again, Becky has been central in that, in supporting the communication and the promotion of it as well. Next slide, please. So what we're doing now, as I say, the trust has had to take a proactive step in looking at accommodation solutions. We can't continue business as usual. So we've started an accommodation board with internal and external stakeholders. And the plan is to meet monthly to discuss our pipeline and then housing opportunities. And then we'll look to work closely with colleagues across the public and private sector on the island and our council colleagues to see what we can do to support the opportunities for key worker housing. The Housing Hub offer regular drop-in sessions across the month for employees to just come and turn up and speak to Becky and find out more guidance and support in terms of opportunities and sharing frustrations and challenges, and to register with the Housing Hub for notifications. And we do now lead. I've got 4 weeks, but it's at least 4 to 6 weeks prior to arriving. We do 2 pre-arrival presentations for incoming cohorts. And as part of that presentation now, we outline all of the accommodation challenges and what they can do early to make sure that they're taking those proactive steps to secure accommodation. And we found that that's been quite well received. And we also email them the presentation and some welcome packs to make sure that they have the right contacts to get started before they even arrive. We have now on-site accommodation, which is currently being reviewed to try and drive occupancy levels and feeding into the accommodation board in terms of our long-term strategy. And we're just, as mentioned earlier, developing our host family agreements to offer more security and support to our incoming arrivals. Working with local estate agents to try and drive up that support across the NHS, which has been really well received so far. And we've got a couple of opportunities that we're just scoping now to see directly with estate agents who really want to support the local key working housing groups. But again, we do have the challenge there in terms of they're only offering seasonal accommodations. And now during the winter months, we've got a good reach of about 2 or 3 properties that we can look at short-term rental opportunities. And then developing our accommodation offer. We're looking at as much as we possibly can. And as I say, looking at our off-site accommodation, our relocation policy, and then our commuting policies to see how we can support those across the island and making sure that we look at our retention plans moving forward. And I think that might be my last slide. So I will kindly hand over to Martin.
Thank you so much, Summer. While Martin comes up and unmutes his mic, I thank you so much for speaking. Martin, as the last speaker of our morning session, you're always going to be constrained a little bit by time. So if I could ask you to finish speaking about 1:05 to leave time for questions and discussion, please.
Yeah, no problems at all. Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you, Summer. Good afternoon, all. Lovely to meet you all virtually. So I'm Martin Jones, Head of People Operations at Solent, and part of my portfolio is overseeing international recruitment for mental health across our ICB. Primarily for Southern Health and Solent, this journey started back in 2020, just as we came out of COVID. And since then, we've welcomed 271 mental health nurses across both trusts and 73 adult nurses to work across our community and inpatient services that we service. We quickly realised during the first 6 to 9 months that accommodation was going to provide a big challenge for us, not only in terms of availability, but also a significant drain in our recruitment team's time. As a trust, we cover a very large geographical patch, and for those that know the area, we cover from Basingstoke in the north, all the way across to Lymington in the west, and then Havant across in the east of Hampshire. Many of our inpatient services are in affluent areas like Winchester, which is in the top 5 cities in the country for housing costs, Alton and Lymington, where property prices are very high and out of the reach of most members of staff that work within the NHS. We then also have sites like our sites at Ravenswood and Bluebird House that are in also very remote locations with poor access, and in some cases, in Ravenswood's case, no access to public transport. We also then discovered quite horrifically that in our areas such as Southampton and Basingstoke, we were actually competing against our acute partners that were also on their internationals journeys. So we were bidding for the same properties on occasions, and on one occasion even driving up the rental cost. Which kind of started the conversations of what we can do to work more collaboratively together. As a trust, or as both trusts, we offer 3 months accommodation to new arrivals, and our recruitment teams are trying to help the nurses find alternative accommodation for when they moved into moving into their own homes with their families. But this was proving a challenge due to costs, and also nurses often being overlooked for discrimination purposes. Pretty much like Summer, zero tolerance policy with regards to discrimination, working with the Housing Hub and obviously working with landlords and estate agents to address those issues. And some of the comments made were just absolutely disgusting, and you can't believe it's taking place in the UK in 2023. Next slide, please, Sharon. So the housing hub was our saviour. Where would I be without the housing hub? I'd look a lot older than I do now, because they have been absolutely fantastic. They've supported us as a trust and our nurses greatly, and I think without them, the international recruitment project wouldn't be the success that it's been over the last 3 years. As Pat mentioned earlier in his slides, we've seen I can never get that word out, significant success on the numbers of tenancies that the hub has set up with us. And without the hub, as I said, it would really be a poor journey that we would be going on. Our international teams have benefited greatly, and then the nurses off the back of that have also benefited greatly from that, because we've been able to put a lot more of our time into that pastoral care, that pastoral support that they need during that first 6 to 12 months of being in the organisations, knowing that the accommodation is in good hands with the housing hub. Our new recruits are introduced to the housing hub at trust induction, and as I said, this has greatly reduced the discrimination that the nurses have been attending with the discrimination. They've been attending viewings, they've been helping with the landlord negotiations, and have been building up excellent relationships with local landlords who are keen to help with the NHS. And I think that is the big factor for me, is we have experts in their job fields that know what they're doing and how to build those relationships, whereas sometimes in our recruitment teams that was lost. What we are seeing is landlords now are coming to us when they have accommodation that is coming free rather than going out to local market. So we're seeing the positiveness of those relationships being built, and that's also helping us in recruiting in other areas. So if we now have a new member of staff that's relocating to the area for a difficult to recruit post, psychiatrists, doctors, etc., that are relocating into the area that aren't quite ready due to completion of their own houses, due to the housing market for sales and etc., we find that we'll be able to go to these landlords now to ask them if they've got any short-term accommodation for us to house the new recruits in an interim manner. As I said, the housing hub, having those experts in the field has really allowed our recruitment teams to really focus on that pastoral support. Possible all the organisations, we've managed to obtain the pastoral award for the NHS, which has been a fantastic piece of work, and it's allowed us time to really focus on that award and improving that situation. Next slide, please, Sharon. As Pat shared earlier, it's not just our international recruits that need help. The stat that stands out for me is the retention of our workforce, with over 40% of our staff looking to relocate out of area due to housing costs. Everyone on the call, obviously we're all involved in recruitment and people services. Just think about what that could be for your organisation if 40% of your workforce left in the next 12 months, and where that would leave you. So what can we do about it? It's time for me to get on my soapbox. I love the housing hub. The housing hub is one of the best initiatives that we've ever brought into our ICB. It's time for us to be brave and start looking at the bigger picture and how we can look after our existing staff and attract more people into our organisations. This could be through better use of NHS land to look at housing options, working closely with third-party providers to provide housing solutions based on the short and medium time. Is it time for us to start looking at assisted guarantor or deposit schemes to help our staff secure the accommodation they need? The housing hub needs to be an addition to our EVP as a significant benefit to help us improve our attraction and retention across all our organisations. Thank you, Housing Hub. Where would I be without you? Back to you, Sharon.
Thank you so much, Martin Summer, for your lovely words. Your enthusiasm, as always, Martin, just shines through. So thank you so much for speaking today. So I would like to invite you. We've heard about the importance of home in recruitment and retention, and we've heard about moving housing potentially from a problem to a solution. in the attraction, recruitment and retention of colleagues. But the challenge, you know, to all of us is this an initiative, you know, a good one, but is it an initiative to steady the ship, or actually are we unlocking a new approach to recruitment and retention, which really talks to the resilience of services in local communities themselves? So I know that Pat's been watching the chat, so I'd like to bring you in, Pat, if I may, to help facilitate some of the conversation in the discussion.
Sure. Yeah, just reflecting on Summer and Martin's presentations, lots of sort of similar themes there, but specific challenges for the geographical areas different as well. So really interesting. So thanks again for those two for sharing that. Some specific questions around NHS rooms, which I think we've answered probably in the chat, around rent levels, landlord guidance, things like that. How's it compare with homestay and other options as well? Interesting, really, about sort of working closely with housing providers. Can there be any other sort of work that we can do across those? And also a question which is really helpful about thinking about the care sector as well, and the social care sector, because we know how important the social care sector is to health and our local communities. So is there a way that we can expand this, take this to colleagues elsewhere across the patch to support them as well? So there are a few sort of the themes coming through.
Fabulous. So would anyone like to ask a question or reflect on observations? I know, Zach, you've posted a message around the impact on the care sector, and I just wonder whether you'd like to come in.
Sorry, get it off me. Can you hear me?
I can,
yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's just the point that you made, Patrick, in that health and care are now increasingly integrated, and has what we do in health has an impact. So yeah, it was whether you'd noticed any adverse impacts. I think international recruits also been recruited to the care sector as well. So is it having an impact there? And if so, you having any thoughts about how you could work closer together to make sure that we don't bolster up the NHS employee value proposition and reduce the social care, which is difficult from a number of perspectives, not least because the pay tends to be a bit less as well.
Definitely, I think so. If I come in on that, I think there's definitely lots of similarities between the workforces. Thinking especially that in terms of our community mental health trusts, where they're a lot more sort of spread out across different communities in a similar model to the kind of dom care delivery model as well. I think there's a lot we could look at through the research and apply that in terms of locations and sort of pay levels and bandings and things like that. But I think a lot of it will be applicable in terms of there'll be a lot of staff out there struggling with housing costs, and to continue working within the industry, but also their well-being as well. Housing is such an important part of that. So there's a lot more. Yeah, there's a lot more we can do, definitely.
Thanks. Do you mind if I ask another question about evaluation?
No, please do.
Yeah. So my question is kind of what kind of evaluation are you building in to the initiative in terms of the impact it's having on things like recruitment and retention? Have you got either any evaluation you've already conducted or something planned, kind of a more longer term perspective?
Yeah, shall I start, Pat? And
yeah, you go for it. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a really good challenge, because we need to prove the value of the investment in the hub. Within Pat's slides, he mentioned that the funding for the hub is from pooled resources across 6 different trust partners. So it's really important that we can demonstrate the value and the impact of the work that we're doing We've been developing a suite of metrics which talk not only to the activity of the housing hub in month in terms of number of people, number of cases, number of tenancies secured, things like that, but also that talks to the strategic case, you know, that bigger prize opportunity. So what is the opportunity from a systems perspective to unlock a pipeline of affordable housing in different markets, but around specific sites, and how do we do that? So we've started taking a conversation to trust executives and onto boards about use of NHS land, be that, you know, surplus or dormant land. Would there be more agile opportunities around modular, you know, construction in sites that aren't, you know, aren't quite ready for disposal, or is there opportunities to actually not sell the land for market value, but actually think about a more social return on investment in terms of affordable and social housing in that footprint. So I think there's a number of things from a strategic perspective. Pat, did you want to come in to add to that, please?
I think, yeah, in terms of kind of impact and evaluation, we've been looking to see how we can identify people that have come to work within our patch for the trust because of the housing hub, and also for those people that would have left if it wasn't for the housing hub. So putting some costs avoided against that in terms of recruiting again, or maybe agency costs because of having to cover for people that have left while recruitment's going on. So we've got some of that work that we're doing. But the team are also rolling out the satisfaction survey with colleagues that have been supported through the hub. So there'll be a lot more feedback there in terms of what it's the impact it's had for them, but also would they have left, would they have come if it wasn't for the housing hub. So there's those sorts of things we're looking at as well.
Thank you.
Sort of following on from the kind of the strategic conversation as well, Tiffany's asking a good point about housing associations and I guess local authorities with voids. Could they share void lists with us? And I'd welcome housing association and local authority housing colleagues to come in here, but I think there's a couple of tricky bits there in terms of, one, there's the demand and the allocations process already within those systems for housing association units and vacancies, so they would be going through the local, generally going through the housing register. Some will sit outside that, but very few. But also it raises a point that some of our colleagues within our trusts will actually, because of their housing situation, qualify for support from their local authority in terms of help with housing as well, etc. So, and it's interesting. It's one of the things we don't think is noted on housing applications. So the number of people that are working in health or social care, for example, who are on the housing register, and that would be a really useful thing to understand to help inform planning and targeting of housing solutions. I don't know if a local authority or a housing association colleague would like to come in and comment on any of that at all. Sorry if I can't see your hand.
Hi Pat, I could comment if you
right,
like.
Okay, Derek. Yeah.
So for other people, I'm Derek Street. I'm from Vivid. I think Pat's summed it up pretty well, actually. I think sometimes people seem to think the housing association sort of can act independently in terms of how they allocate their properties. That's not the case. In most cases, 100% nomination rights are with the local authority, so we have to go through the local authority. But I suppose a general point I think I wanted to make, and I have sort of spoken to Pat about this before, is that whilst we're talking here about key workers in the health area, we could be having this conversation about refugees, about homeless people, about families in temporary accommodation. The underlying issue of all of this is a shortage of supply of housing. We have got a housing crisis, and I think the difficulty is splitting it up in this way kind of perhaps sometimes moves away from the general message that, you know, we need more housing, basically.
Thanks for coming in, Derek. Yeah, absolutely. That supply is key, isn't it? Councillor Filker, did I see a hand raised? Sorry if I.
You did, and it was just really to reinforce that point. It's not about moving around the existing affordable housing stock, because there just isn't a sufficient amount. It is about supply, and it's for all partners to contribute to land to help unlock that supply. So we all have a responsibility there. We've all got big bits of land that we could maybe do more with and work more creatively in how do we deliver new homes on them, and that we really are very mindful as well when we look at rental properties, that with the affordable rent model, which is 80% of market rent, is still out of reach of many people that we're aiming to get into accommodation for, particularly for Hampshire.
Absolutely. It's a real challenge, isn't it? To try and find and unlock solutions that actually are affordable within family budgets. I think I saw another hand, and I'm really sorry.
Hi.
Yes.
Hi. My name is Lisa
Hi.
Tyler from Sussex. My question is that we have, because our international group is now smaller, and we had purchase or rental lease different types of accommodation within our area, from all the way from East Croydon all the way to Bognor to Eastbourne area. And now we're smaller, and we're doing passive and everything with our accommodation, but we're finding that we're having void space. So how do I know that you're on an island and things like that, but y'all must have some issues with void space, because we know our area, we have, like I said, a housing problem also, and we found ways around it. So instead of just doing for our international students, we're using it as a relocation to people who lives in the UK, but we still have a little bit, like 2 or 3 rooms that's empty, and we're losing that space, or a flat that's empty. How did y'all engage with the other trusts to join a housing association? Because where we are, we have two trusts that we're competing against rental, but we have rental space, but we don't got no one in there to cover the cost. So have y'all had a problem with void space before? That's the question.
Thank you. I'm really sorry, my sound isn't great. I've got a bit of a crackle on the line, but I think you were talking about how do you work collaboratively with other trusts, and I think that's absolutely.
Yes, to combat the void space of losing money from empty housing. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are several things there. I think there's certainly a call for collaboration and a call for working together. But one of the things that we've been exploring is the concept of a cascading nominations agreement, where trusts work collaboratively, and properties are allocated and let and advertised on a cascading nature. So if one market doesn't have the necessary uptake, it cascades to the next. So it might be NHS, it might be social care, it might be police, fire and ambulance, whichever the priority order is for you. But I think there are opportunities. I'm also really mindful of time, and I think we could have continued the conversation for another half an hour at least. But I'm really conscious to finish on time so that people can leave for further meetings. So I would like to thank you again for your time today. We'd really love to be able to continue the conversation offline. So if there are any queries that we've not managed to get to in the chat today, please do reach out to speak to either Patrick or myself. This is one of a series of mini bite-sized lunchtime sessions that we're taking forward about the importance of home to health. And so on the screen here, you'll see in December we're focusing on housing as a founding determinant for mental well-being. January we're looking at avoidable hospital admissions, and in March we're looking at how we might reduce reoffending through working in homelessness prevention as a system. So thank you so much for joining us today. Stay safe, keep well, and the slides and other materials and assets related to to the key worker housing space will be sent to you on email. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.